we end up getting through our grief and working through grief because of our ability to remember, not our ability to forget.
Dave Roberts teaches a course on death, dying, and bereavement at Utica College in New York. He lost his 18-year-old daughter, Janine, to cancer in 2003. In addition to leading grief groups, he is a retired addiction professional. Out of his nearly 3 decades of working with people who suffered from substance use disorder, he wrote a blog titled, "They Were Unique, Misunderstood, and Among My Greatest Teachers." In this episode of Grieving Out Loud, Dave promotes looking at the addict as a whole person and gives advice on dealing with stigmatized deaths, such as overdose and suicide.
I mean, these are intelligent, creative, passionate individuals who have danced with addiction, and some will dance with recovery and stay in recovery, and others can't get away from that dance with addiction. But it does not make them less than who they are. It does not make them bad people because they engaged in substance use.
Thank you so much, Dave, for joining me on this podcast. I'm very excited to have a conversation with you today about your experiences with loss and also with working with people with substance use disorder and helping the grieving. So thank you so much for being here.
Well, thank you for inviting me, Angela. I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Let's start off a little bit about some of your work with people who suffer from substance use disorder. I'm going to include a link to your blog, which really touched me and I find so true. I want to talk about some of the stigma around addiction. Mm-hmm. And you wrote a blog called "They Were Unique, Misunderstood, and Among My Greatest Teachers." And in that blog, you talked about working with people suffering from substance use disorder and how they're typically called a lot of names: addict, junkie, and looked down upon. Yet I have always contended, and based upon my experience with my own daughter, they are among some of the most creative geniuses that walk this earth. If we certainly look back in history, we certainly see many people had addiction issues who were brilliant musicians and artists and writers and contributed so much to society. And we don't always look at them as whole people, as you pointed out. So tell me a little bit about the time that you worked with people and what that was like for you.
Well, Angela, the substance abuse field wasn't something I was looking to get into when I was a human service professional, but it was something that gradually found me. One of the first jobs I had was, interestingly, as a youth employment counselor at a local non-for-profit agency in the Utica, New York area. And part of my job was going to, to visit certain agencies in the area, get job descriptions, get, agency descriptions, and pass those on to young adults that I work with in the event that they were interested in checking it out further. I went into this one place. It was the Utica Day Treatment Center, which was a part then of the Utica Psychiatric, or the Mercy Alcoholism Treatment Center. And this was a day treatment center that had a variety of different individuals from all walks of life who experienced substance use issues. So I did job skills training with them, found out that I really liked working with that particular group of individuals just because they were so appreciative for anything that you did for them and the time that you gave. And just because I just discovered that they were just very intelligent, very passionate individuals who were motivated to embrace sobriety. And so one thing led to another. I got a job working as a stop DWI probation officer for the United County Probation Department. From there, I went to an outpatient substance use agency called Insight House. And from there, I went to an inpatient substance use treatment facility called, it was then the Mercy Alcoholism Treatment Center, but it became the Mike McPike Addiction Treatment Center, where I served for 26 years, not only as an addiction counselor, but as a clinical supervisor. And I worked with individuals anywhere from age 18 on up who had not only substance use issues, but also co-occurring mental health challenges as well, too. So that field naturally, I think, found me. It wasn't something I embraced, but it embraced me.
Don't you think mental health issues and addiction really do go hand in hand?
Yes, we had towards the last 12 years we had an integrated dual recovery program where we had individuals who were diagnosed with both substance use disorders and mental health issues that we worked with in an integrated fashion, where we worked with both sets of challenges at the same time through didactic education, through through group therapy, through individual counseling. We believed that both needed to be addressed at the same time in order for recovery, to be efforts to be maximized. And before the distinction was that, well, you would either deal with parallel treatment, which meant that you had one person going to two separate agencies with two different sets of guidelines, with nobody communicating with each other from either agency, either the mental health agency or the substance use agency, or you did something called sequential treatment, where you would prioritize which symptoms needed to be addressed first, and neither one of those worked. So we discovered that integrated approach was more successful and proven to be have better treatment outcomes, just from all our internal research that we did.
And when you say that some of the people you worked with in those settings taught you the most, were your greatest teachers, tell me what you mean by that.
I mean, one of the things that they taught me was to respect their own unique needs, whether, regardless of whether or not I could identify with that. It didn't matter to me what I saw their needs to be. And when you're a beginning human service practitioner, I think one of the things is we're so I think, intent on helping an individual that we tend to become more directive, and we need to be more client-centered. I'll give you an example of a client that I worked with. It was one of the first clients that I worked with in the early 90s. Female in her mid-30s, had a history of, I believe it was alcohol, cocaine addiction, multiple treatment presentations, history of relapse. She also had a history, I believe, of eating disorders, and she also had a history of being physically and emotionally abused. And she had been through numerous treatment facilities to the point, Angela, where she could have actually probably gotten up and done any lecture that we had on the program schedule, because she had seen these over and over. So one of the first things that I had asked her was, what is it that you need that you didn't get in previous rehabs? I know what you learned, but what is it that you need now? And she had identified with Native American spiritual practices. She found that had given her a lot of comfort. And she was 25% Native American. And she wanted to be going to a Native American, rehabilitation setting or residential setting. I knew nothing about Native American traditions at that time, but that's what she wanted. So I was driven to get her in there. Thing with that facility is that they required an individual who was at least 50% Native American and proof of Native American tribal affiliation. She had none of that, but she was so determined that she wanted to incorporate this in her recovery program. I listened to her needs, and I advocated for her, and she got in. She sent me a letter 6 months later saying that, thank you, you saw what I needed, you knew I would grasp at it and keep it, and I appreciate the fact that you did this for me. And she maintained sobriety. The last I knew, she was, she told me she was sober, she was going to A meetings. And essentially what I learned is that anybody that comes in for treatment knows what they need. We need to meet them where they're at as far as what they need, regardless of whether we feel at that point it is what they need. We need to meet them from what they feel they need to accomplish for themselves. Once we do that, then we can begin to collaborate them with other areas as well too. So that's one of the first things that they taught me.
And so that's looking at a person as a whole person, and also realizing that no two addictions are the same. I think
Exactly.
they cannot all be, there's no formulaic way. I mean, obviously there are tools that work, but people are individuals.
Yeah, and what worked for this young lady wouldn't have worked for anybody else. So it's basically, what is it that's going to work? Nobody takes the same path to recovery. Everybody's going to do it differently. It's just, how can we tune in to what that individual needs so that they can empower themselves to take responsibility, for their recovery. And the more we can empower individuals to take responsibility for their recovery, I believe the better success that they will have in maintaining long-term sobriety. That's our job, I believe, as human service professionals in working effectively with this group of individuals.
And the stigma that they face and the shame, I think, did you see that lessening at all?
Honestly, and I've been out of the substance use. I retired in 2012, but up until the time that I was there, I have not seen it lessening. And in my work with parents whose children have died as a result of overdose or have had issues with substance use, from what they've told me now, from their experience, it really hasn't. They still face some of the questions that no parent should ever have to face, who's lost a child due to by suicide or due to complications from addiction or to overdose, in terms of, well, I mean, and I had one parent tell me whose child died from an apparent overdose or suicide, that she went to a member of the clergy who said, well, you'll never see your daughter again in the afterlife because suicide's a sin. And I'm thinking to myself, that's the worst thing you can tell anybody, a parent or anybody, because that's to me, that's just false. One of the things that they also taught me, and this is another thing that I think I mentioned in the article that you cited, is that a lot of times we will judge an individual who has substance use disorders, their success is either being an either or their failure being an either or. Their success is either they embraced recovery and that was a permanent path that they took, or they relapsed into addiction. But what we fail to look at, Angela, is what's in between. During the periods of sobriety, I've talked to many individuals who were 10, 15, 20 years sober, who did meaningful service work in AA, who made meaningful impacts in their careers, who helped others, who left legacies with their art, with their poetry. And that stuff tends to get overlooked because everybody's too results oriented. It's like, well, either they succeeded in their recovery or they failed. And we failed to look at what happened in between. And which to me tells me, they taught me that you really truly can't judge the value of anybody's life, just through just specific outcomes. It's the totality of the life that's mattered. It's the totality of their contributions that matter. And that gets overlooked with individuals who have substance use. I mean, these are intelligent, creative, passionate individuals who have danced with addiction, and some will dance with the recovery and stay in recovery, and others can't get away from that dance with addiction. But it does not make them less than who they are. It does not make them bad people because they engaged in substance use.
Right. And I always talk about how, the first couple of times it is a choice. Usually it's a choice made by a young person. They typically, not always. I mean, sometimes alcoholism sneaks up on people in middle age and older, but certainly with many harmful substances that are out there today, it's typically a young person making a choice or two. And then at some point the choice ends and the brain takes over and says, you got to have this again. You got to have this again. And I think that's what we often fail to understand. Well, just don't do drugs, just quit, or just don't drink. And I think that our society wants to see everything in black and white. We want to see people as one-dimensional. and I just think that your perspective, especially as a grieving parent yourself, I know you lost your 18-year-old daughter, Janine, to cancer. And so you understand what parents are going through and this kind of loss. And I always say loss is loss, except that in the case of your daughter dying from cancer, that's acceptable. And in the case of my daughter dying from really fentanyl poisoning, really drug-induced homicide is how I look at it. That's not acceptable because she made a choice initially to use. Do you see the differences there? Do you see that, what I'm talking about?
Oh, I see exactly what you're talking about. Is that to die from for a child to die from one cause of death is in some people's eyes better or worse than another cause of death. And for me, and you mentioned this, and one of the roles that I had as a parent, as a parent who, who wanted and desired and found meaning in renewed purpose after the death of my daughter, was I was a Compassionate Friends chapter leader. And Compassionate Friends is a national organization that supports families following the death of a child. And we support families whose child has died of any age and from any cause. Doesn't matter whether it's addiction, whether it's cancer, whether it's suicide. The common ground that we as parents experience is that we have to manage the unthinkable. It is unnatural for us to bury one of our children, okay, regardless of cause of death. The common ground is that the pain of that loss is so intense of losing a child. We bond around that pain. But the other piece of this is that we're all trying to pick up the pieces of a world that was shattered, and our assumptive world that was shattered, our beliefs, our priorities that were just completely destroyed because the unthinkable happened. One of our children died. That's where we come together. Cause of death, there are issues as a clinician that are related specifically to cause of death, whether it be murder, sudden death, miscarriage or newborn death. But to me, it's like, as parents, we're trying to pick up the pieces and we're trying to figure out what type of a world we're going to live in, and what type of people we're going to be. And that's where we need to come together. And we need to do that with compassion. We need to do that with understanding. And we need to do this with the understanding that all of our children, when you boil it down to it, are love and light anyway, regardless of the path that they chose to take or they took, during their lives. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. They're all beautiful. They're all beautiful. And that's their essence.
Unfortunately, the huge increase in overdose deaths and fentanyl poisoning, we've got 223 mostly young people dying every single day. And so there are more and more of us parents out there who are coping with this kind of loss and the loss of a child. I think in probably no other, obviously throughout history, before modern medicine, people lost children by routine, right? I mean, they had a lot of kids and maybe one or two died, but in modern times, I would think that the number of grieving parents out there is higher than it's ever been.
Well, you look at, and I teach a death, dying, and bereavement course at Utica College, and one of the textbooks I use, and this was data probably around 2010, that 144,000 individuals, children between the ages of 15 and 24, died every year. The number one cause of death in that age group, I think, used to be accidental death due to car accidents. Right. But I was reading recent statistics, recent study in 2017, where drug overdoses have now replaced car crashes as the leading cause of accidental death in the United States. Now, I don't know, Angela, if that's by a specific age group, but you're looking now at drug overdoses as being replaced as being the number one cause of death, replacing accidents in the United States. That's as of 2017. And the thing is that our young adults are getting exposed to information, whether it be through the internet, whether it be through just, at a younger age now. They're getting exposed to substances at a younger age. Back, I think, in the 70s, the average age of diagnosis for substance use was like mid-40s. Now it's lower, it's mid-20s. And when before I retired in 2012 from the state of New York, we were seeing a lot more younger opioid addicts, whether it be prescription painkillers or heroin. They were coming in probably anywhere from 18 to 25. We were seeing a lot, and this was in 2012. Okay, and now it's just continued to increase.
Unfortunately, that is the case. It has increased exponentially. And
Yep.
with the fentanyl and the drug supply, it's just, it's a frightening time. It's a frightening time to have children and to be growing up in this world. But once we lose them in this way, it's also hard for us as parents to find our way back. Maybe, I
Mm-hmm.
guess we are forever changed. I mean, would you agree with that after losing your daughter? I'm sure we're just forever changed. But also with the stigma that goes along with this kind of death, it can be hard to reclaim your life or even want to if you feel that in your mind you're thinking that people are constantly judging you and your family,
Mm-hmm.
to reclaim your life at all.
Well, and the thing is I think individuals or parents or families whose loved ones or children or loved ones die of a stigmatized death, whether it be through addiction, suicide, they are we're isolated. You guys, we're isolated to begin with as parents who have lost a child because our world has become different, and it was very difficult for me to re-engage in a world that I didn't feel a part of anymore because my world had changed. I mean, I'd be watching everybody else go on with their daily business, and I couldn't connect with that because my world had been so different. I think the isolation, individuals and parents who have lost children to stigmatize that probably, I would imagine, and I've been told, also feel more isolated because of the stigma. And you've probably seen this, Angela, as well too, in obituaries. You won't see cause of death of stigma, for stigmatized deaths routinely discloses died suddenly or died unexpectedly. And if it's a child, you can read between the lines that it's either through suicide, through overdose, or complications from addiction. And you can read through those lines. But because the fear of being judged is so, I think, so profound with survivors of stigmatized death, the cause of death doesn't get publicized, except to those close family members or friends.
Sometimes it's not in the obituary, but it's talked about at the service too. That's often
Yep.
the case. Not always, but often. And I think maybe it's just because they feel people who are attending the funeral had a connection to this person or to the family, where they don't want necessarily the world to know this shame, because we all, addicts carry the shame, their families carry the shame. I just think it's, do you see a way to lessen that?
I think it requires, I think, educating those individuals and just general in society, and in those educators, corporations, about addiction and what it is and what it means, that the addiction doesn't define the worth of a person. As I've told individuals, as I believe it's something that person did, it does not define their inner strengths or it doesn't define who they are as a person. It's a part of what they did, but it shouldn't diminish from the ultimate gifts that that they provided to their friends, and their ultimate strengths and gifts. It should not detract from that. So I think one is widespread education. The other thing is that I think for parents who have experienced a lot of shame and guilt, and maybe for thinking that, geez, could I have done something differently? If you knew then what you knew now, you might have done something differently. I believe that parents did the best they could given the hands of cards they were dealt with. You treated your children out of love. You tried to set some type of boundaries and know that. But once they get out in the world, and with peer influence and peer pressure and other things that they're dealing with, that they may keep underground for fear of not burdening you, you have no control. But you did the best that, I think, what parents I'd like to instill with them is that you did you did the best that you could, given the hands of cards that you dealt with, and you did it out of love. And you have nothing to be ashamed or guilty about.
We have all kinds of parents listening to this podcast who are in different phases of their grief journey. For somebody who's lost someone in the last months, year, what kind of advice, having been through this yourself, Dave, what kind of advice would you have for parents? I think that I always say the first year is shock and the second year is depression. And the third year has been me trying to figure out, I don't know, who I am now. What?
Yep.
What about for you?
For me, I learned very quickly that the stages of grief don't apply to loss. I've learned that very quickly, and research has over the years has disproven that people grieve in stages. Ironically, when I was an addictions counselor, we got all of our information through Hazelden, which was one of the biggest clearinghouses and still is, I think, on substance use education. And we did grief work or grief counseling, going through the stages of grief. And I can recall sitting there with a client going through grief and going through each of the stages. And I look at that now and I said, boy, was I so misinformed. Because the first thing I would tell parents is release any expectation that there's going to be any specific time limit for you to get from the raw pain of grief to a point where you have accepted that you're living in a world without the physical presence of your child. It will take as long as it takes. So the first thing is the first year is to be gentle with yourself. Understand that there are going to be changes physically. You may not be sleeping as well. Your eating habits may be disrupted. Your immune system may be compromised because of the stress or grief. You're going to be susceptible to illness. Cognitively, there's forgetfulness. I would walk into my pantry and forget what I was walking in there for. Okay.
Right. I always think it's like a brain injury, especially if it's like a traumatic death, but just the death of a child itself is traumatic. And I always likened it to like a brain injury. Like my brain just felt scrambled, I would not remember things or just basic things. And I would say to people, have to excuse me. My memory hasn't been the same.
And it's forgetfulness and especially rumination about the person's, last day of their lives. I mean, for me, and I think for me with my daughter, I replayed the last day of her life over and over and over in my head. And I needed to do that to try to come to terms with it and to kind of understand where that fit in terms of rewriting the narrative of my life without my daughter. So the changes emotionally, there are moments where I was feeling really good and other moments that I just broke down without warning. It's not anything we have any control over. So I tell individuals, ride the wave, just let everything that happens, every emotion you experience during that first year, sit with it. Don't try to suppress it. Just write it out. Even if eventually it will have something to teach you, even if it teaches you that you can survive that particular moment. I also encourage support. Go to a good support group, whether it be through the Compassionate Friends or another support group that's sponsored by hospice, that's specifically for parents who have experienced the loss of a child. If obviously they can find a group that where their children have died as a result of addiction or overdose, that would be ideal. But find a group that understands that loss is loss as far as with the cause of death for child loss, and that focuses on helping you pick up the pieces of a life that has been in shambles. And you're right about the first year. The second year, and again, I'll probably I may hear about this, but the second year for many individuals is worse than the first year, because the first year is kind of surreal. You're still in still in shock from the loss, and then the second year reality hits. And it's actually, for me, it was 1 year and 1 day following the anniversary date of my daughter that I realized that this is going to be my life. She's not coming back. I now have to learn how to deal with this. And there was pain and emptiness in addition, to the emotional pain. There's emptiness in addition to that. So it's a marathon, not a sprint. Focus on moving forward, and focus to keep moving until you see that ray of light that tells you that, okay, I'm ready to re-engage in life and I am ready to move forward, honoring the memory of my child and integrating the best parts of my child into whom I am, so that I can move forward and continue to remember and make a difference.
Where was that turning point for you? Where did you find that light, that hope?
Let me tell you, it came out of the most unlikely of places, Angela. One of I had a crisis of faith, pretty much like you, after Emily died. I questioned God's motives. I questioned everything. And ironically, I was going to a bereavement support group for parents who had lost a child that was facilitated by a Catholic nun. And I could share this stuff with her because she understood that. But I remember the turning point for me was when I actually decided I was going to stop being a bereaved parent. I just said, it was about 2 years, I said, I've had enough of this. I've had enough of support groups. I've had enough of missing my daughter. I just want my life to be the way it was. So I threw myself into work, cut myself off from the support that was, from any kind of support from other parents who had been longer on the journey than me, who had been more advanced. And I was miserable. So I went to see Sister Rose, and I talked with her, and I broke down, and I said, I'm angry at God because he took my daughter. Just like that. Now, instead of telling me that I was probably going to be doomed for a life of eternal damnation, she looked at me and she goes, well, what if God was just as upset as you were that your child died? And that got me to take a look at things. And at the time, I was beginning to experience what I thought were signs from my daughter. I'd hear a song on the radio that we both liked when I was thinking about her. And I didn't at that point in early grief understand the significance of signs in terms of helping us move through grief and continue in a relationship with our children in spirit. But I started thinking about it. I said, maybe he is as upset as I am because he keeps trying to throw me signs, to show me signs of my daughter's presence. So that was a turning point for me, where I said, okay, now moving forward, I began to say, okay, now I'm going to try to live a life of meaning, and I'm going to strive for that. And that was a turning point for me at that point. But it was still a process of getting to acceptance. But that was a start for me of getting there on that. That was a start of me getting on that path and going on that path.
Do you believe that our relationship with our children continues after their death, and how?
I think if you take a look at signs from our loved ones, I mean, for me, I've had experiences where I've seen literally hearts. I had one heart around my daughter's anniversary date that was in tile from our kitchen floor. There are others where a lot of signs will come out through numerology. If I see 3-1 just out of the blue, like, today I was watching a baseball game and before our podcast, and one of the players' batting averages was 310. So I'm looking at myself, well, this is going to be a fun podcast. So all these things are because my daughter made her presence. But in order for that to happen, you need to be open to that. You need to be open to establishing that kind of relationship or that kind of bond. And I've had individuals that have come to support group meetings that have talked to me about all kinds of signs that they've got, whether it be through butterflies, whether it be through cardinals, because they happen to be thinking of their child. Our relationships with our children are our children. They're going to be our children regardless of where they are in the universe. And we can still maintain that connection, through through talking with them, through through a variety of different things, and being open to the fact that they will communicate their presence to a variety of different signs. One, if we're open to it, and secondly, we want to consider that possibility. That in and of itself, Angela, has helped me understanding that we can utilize that knowledge of signs to develop a continuing bond or relationship. That has allowed me to among other things, to embrace a peaceful perspective with what's happened to me. Does it replace the fact that she's physically not here? Do I still yearn for her physical presence? Absolutely. But I realized, and signs in the beginning were bittersweet. They were a sign of what I was missing, literally. They were a reminder that Janine wasn't physically present. Now when I get a sign from her, it reminds me that she's here, although it's in a different form.
I've received some signs too early on, more intense, especially. I think because I was so worried because I was there when my daughter had died. And to me, death had felt like just nothing, like nothingness, right? Yep. And that is really what I would say shattered my faith, was that like I had talked to parents because I had previously worked with the Children's Miracle Network, and had talked with parents who'd lost younger children who had seen, signs upon their death or something that comforted them. But I had no comfort. I just felt like it was a vast nothingness. And, it was interesting how intense the signs were in the beginning. And now I would say I don't have many signs 3 years in. Maybe I'm not looking for them. I also think a lot of these things can be coincidence, right? I mean, things are easy to, butterflies or cardinals are easy to explain away, right? And I once talked to a counselor who said to me, well, because I was explaining, I don't know if this was a sign or not. Maybe it was a sign. Maybe I just want it to be a sign. And she said, what does it matter? If it brings you comfort and it helps you, what does it matter if it's a coincidence, if it's random, if it's really a sign or not? And I thought that was a really good point. We can take comfort in these signs, and we don't have to. I'm a skeptic by nature, so I always look for the meaning of things, or the roots of things, or the truth behind them. I think that's just maybe another aspect of faith, right?
Yeah, exactly. And also, it's part of a willingness for us to embrace a different perspective, that we can define relationships differently. We can have a relationship with our loved one in spirit. And we don't have to necessarily wait for signs from our loved ones. We can, I remember there was during Janine's 8th angel anniversary, I developed I put together a mix of favorite songs that we like. I put it on our iPad, and I lit some incense, put the headphones on, and just started, inviting her to my presence. I just, told her that, I missed her, and told her that, why don't you come down and spend some time with me? That was just the message. And so one of the first concerts I ever took her to, and we loved going to rock concerts together, was when she was about 12 or 13. I took her to see the Gin Blossoms and the Goo Goo Dolls at the State Fair. We had a blast. We had a total blast. So I had some Goo Goo Dolls songs and Gin Blossom songs on the iPad. First, and I put it on shuffle. I just put it on random mode. The first 2 songs that came up were Guess, one by the Gin Blossoms and another by the Goo Goo Dolls. So I knew I sensed then that she heard me and she was present. And, I spent about an hour, just listening to tunes, bringing her into conscious memory. It was a great experience. I had peace for the rest of that day because of that. So we can create our own activities to connect with our children. We don't have to wait for a sign. Well, we can do it ourselves, understanding that, if we can begin to believe that relationships are in fact eternal, we can do that. And that has brought me some peace. Plus taking the best parts of who she was, her best characteristics, and making them a part of me. And was my daughter an angel? No. She had her wilderness phase where she was, she got in trouble. But we can remember those beautiful parts of our children and incorporate those beautiful parts into who we are. And I think for individuals who have gone through stigmatized loss, that kind of integration, I think, can bring some peace, because what we're looking at is what were our children's strengths? What were our children's characteristics? What legacy did they leave for the world, regardless of the choices or decisions or the path that they took?
And those can be things such in my case, my daughter's artwork is, very important to me, that I keep that alive and use that as part of the charity. Helping people in her name is a way for me, I guess, to continue my relationship with her. But they don't have to be big things. They can be small things too, right?
Yeah. I mean, just a little thing like, like when I go to school, I'll open a door for somebody. I'll even, if they're like about 5 or 6 feet behind me, I'll leave the door open for them. And I know I'm doing it. It's just not only me doing it, it's my daughter doing it. And it's just that type of kindness. So it could be something little. You could even make a donation, a small donation in the name of your child to a charity that they valued, or to a cause that they value. Like if your children liked animals, your local humane society would be a great place to do a donation. So, you don't have to do things like a foundation. You can do just those little small acts of kindness to remember and keep your child's memory right in the forefront. Keep the memory of your child right at conscious level.
And I think the secret is probably to keep doing it, right? To keep that up consistently in a way that it's also can be healing for you as well then.
By constantly remembering and honoring the relationships we had with our children, that will allow us to get through grief. I've heard some therapists, and there are a lot of therapists, Angela, I'm sure are a good therapist, but don't do grief very well. They'll just say something like, well, let's put your grief in a box and bury the box. Well, no, I'm not going to do that, because if I bury the box, I'm denying the fact that my child even existed. I'm not going to do that. We end up getting through our grief and working through grief because of our ability to remember, not our ability to forget.
I love that saying, our ability to remember, not our ability to forget, gets us through grief. Because I think a very old-fashioned way of dealing with grief was to put it in that box, put it away, never talk about it again, right? I mean, people, that was the way people did things 20, 30, 40 years ago.
Yeah, it's been a year. Why are you still crying? It's been 6 months. Why are you still crying? I mean, this whole time-limited perspective that many in Western society got, that after a year, we're supposed to be just move on with our lives as if nothing has happened, is still advised, because any type of loss we experience changes the landscape of our life, whether it's a grandparent, whether it's a child, that permanently changes the landscape of our life. And we always have to make decisions. Okay, how are we going to continue to live in a world without the physical presence of those people that have meant the most to us?
And I think a lot of times we don't want that landscape to be changed, right? We want to deny what is in the present moment. And that's where I think we run into trouble too, as grieving people. I believe that that's one thing that struck me right away. Like, this was not supposed to be my story. I wasn't supposed to be part of this script, and I was, and there's nothing I could do to change it. And it's happened, and nothing I can do to undo it. Right. Death is permanent. And accepting that, it's a hard thing to accept sometimes.
It is. We intellectually, we know that we are all are going to transition at some day. But when it happens, it is difficult to accept, particularly when it is a loss that defies the natural order of the universe, whether it's the loss of a child, a young widow or a widower, or I even look at, Angela, the fact that people have been married for 60 years and one of them, that those individuals die. I mean, you've lived your whole life. Your whole world has been built around that person you were involved with for 3/4 of your life. That is also going to rock that person's assumptive world. It's like, how do I go on? What do I do? It just changes the landscape of our lives, and we have to learn to adjust.
Right. And that's the hard part.
It is. And that's why I tell individuals, be gentle with yourself, because that adjustment or acceptance process is going to take time. It's going to take time. And don't get, locked into what experts may say. They may say, well, it's anywhere from 3 to 5 years is a period of time that is average for individuals to begin to adjust and accept that their world is permanently changed. I tell individuals that's a setup. It's for some people, it could be shorter. That process to get to acceptance may be shorter, depending on that individual and the resources that they have. It does not matter how long it takes, as long as you are moving and there's movement and progress. Everybody's going to do it at their own pace and do it differently. And it's just, which is why I tell individuals, grief's a marathon, it's not a sprint. It's focus on movement, focus on tiny steps of progress every day.
And like you said, I feel very strongly like I've had to incorporate this into my life and into who I am. I can't deny it and I can't move on, but I can move forward.
Yep. And that's it. We can move forward. There's no such thing as moving on from a loss, especially if you tell that to a parent, well, move on. No, I don't want to move. I'm not going to move on, because moving on implies that moving on means I need to forget, or implies forgetting that my child's legacy and existence. But moving through is different than moving on. I don't use the term closure anymore, because there's no closure to a life. The grieving process for us is going to be lifelong. But I firmly believe that in time, if we are doing the work necessary and we are focusing on re-engaging in life, no matter how long that takes, grief becomes softer.
And it changes too. I think, I just wrote a blog called The Fade on the 3-year anniversary of my daughter's death. And I had been feeling this for a few months. Like at first, if you talk about feeling their presence, I felt my daughter's presence so strongly. It was just like, and now I feel it a little bit less and less all the time, where I still have, it's not that I've lost my memory of her. It's just the intensity of her presence here on this earth has lessened. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
I tried to write about it in a way that people could relate to, who are on the same journey or who have lost someone. But maybe it's just the intensity of the emotion of grief is not as brutal. Maybe that's a good way to put it.
Yeah, I think that is, and the other part of it is you've integrated who Emily is, the best part of who she is, and you know where she is. She's where my daughter is. She's right here. She's always with me. Okay, my daughter is right here. She's in my head. She's in my heart. She's in my soul. When you do your work, when you do anything, whether it's in the context of your job, whether your career, whether it's in the context of service work, your daughter's right with it. She's there. I look at that as the process of integration, where we integrate who our children are, the best parts of who they are. We're a package deal. I tell my students in Death and Dying, and they know my history, including the death of my daughter. I'm very open with that. And I will tell them the best parts of who she is are incorporated in me. And I said, you're going to get a package deal. You're going to get both me and her. Okay, so with whatever you do, you're Emily's part of that, and exactly where she is. She's right here.
Yeah, now I'm going to cry a little bit, I think. So I do appreciate that thought, and that's true. It's probably more that I'm thinking the intensity of the grief lessens a little bit. The intensity of the you just feel like your heart's been ripped out, right? And it's not that the pain completely goes away, but that maybe we just can't stay in that intensely painful spot. Or if we do, it's so harmful to us that we can't cope with anything else.
One of the things I've said is we have to wallow in the muck of grief before we can wallow through it. We have to kind of let the emotions that we experience, we kind of got to let it engulf us. We kind of got to let it, we have to sit with it. We have to work through it. We can try to suppress it, but I tried that and didn't work.
Usually it's a one-way ticket to somewhere bad, right? So
it's like trying to suppress a beach ball. And I've used this example. In fact, I got this out of a book by Debbie Ford called The Dark Side of the Light Chasers. Is that if you suppress a beach ball, let's say that beach ball had grief or sadness or anger, and you suppress that anger into let's say a container of water. you can suppress it for a while, but once you let up on the ball, the anger pops to the surface. And I tell my students, now you can get all of your friends that come over will gladly suppress your sadness because they want you to be happy. All of them will suppress that ball, but as soon as you guys let up on the ball's coming back up and your anger is right. So what is it? What's it telling you? It's telling you, look, I'm not going away. So you might as well let me be a teacher to you. And if we can begin to look at it in that perspective where we look at every emotion that we experience through challenges having something to teach us and not to be suppressed, that helps us also get through the challenge.
I love that. Every emotion is a teacher to us if we just stop and pay attention and listen to that. Yeah, and figure out what it's trying to teach us. So
that's right.
Wonderful.
That's right.
Well, thank you so much for joining me today. It's been a pleasure talking with you. And I lots of quotes in here. I want to just write them all down, everything that you said, because a lot of truth behind your words. So thank you.
Thank you. Well, thank you, Angela. I enjoyed our interview immensely.
Thank you for joining me for this latest edition of Grieving Out Loud. If you're enjoying the podcast, please consider giving a positive review. Wishing you faith, hope, and courage.